Thank you again to our presenters for their excellent presentations and insights. We will now begin our question and answer panel. If you haven't had a chance to enter your question into the Q&A chat pod, please do so now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. And now we'll go on to our first question. That looks like it came in for Dr. Jeff Summers. Dr. Summers, is there an equivalent office or program to the oncology regulatory expertise and early guidance for other therapeutic areas?
Thanks, Nora, for the question. The rare disease program at FDA has a lot of programs aimed towards trying to help the development of drugs for rare diseases because they're a lot of times economically infeasible to develop. And so I don't know specifically what those programs are, but I know that they're very interactive, and I can't highlight more the positive impact that I think that they have also to the Office of Translational Sciences but we, Oncology developed the OREG program through the Oncology Center of Excellence with, Rick Pasder's help, and I'm not aware of any similar program across the other OND divisions, except for the rare diseases program. But there are a lot of different programs, and I may be unaware of everything.
Right. Thank you so much for that response. We have another question for you, Dr. Summers. Is it mandatory to have a pre-IND meeting before the initial IND submission?
Hey, thanks, Nora, for that question. Yeah, no, I saw that. There's a couple other ones I might touch on too as well, but absolutely not. I mean, you can come in with an IND. I have sat on a number of panels, and one of them was at AACR a few years ago, and a very, very competent CEO of a biotech oncology drug company was it came along with the idea was they had to hurry. Their drug was they were in competition with everyone, and so they did that, and they got put on hold, and he was, and then fortunately those are kind of things that need to be reported to various agencies outside of FDA in the United States, and that may not necessarily look great for your development program. So I would highly recommend that you take advantage of every chance to interact with the FDA, whether that be aid meetings, the OREG program, the pre-IND and the pre-IND meeting during your development plan, so that you can be as informed as possible and understand what those roadblocks are, and so that you can go around them and navigate them more easily. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that information as well. And now we'll address some questions that came in for Dr. Paresma Patel. Dr. Patel, during the development timeline for small molecule therapeutics, at what stage in the interaction with the FDA do we reach agreement about which steps in the synthesis should be GMP?
Thank you for this question. It's probably one of the top questions that we get from the CMC discipline. So I want to start by just pointing out the regulations that actually govern current good manufacturing practices, or CGMPs. Those regulations are outlined in 21 CFR 210 and 211. And these regulations are really focused on commercial manufacturing and may not be appropriate for phase 1 studies. So for phase 1 studies, in my slides, I did include a link for the phase 1 investigational drugs CGMP guidance, and that provides some of the requirements for phase 1 studies and CGMP requirements for phase 1 studies. Now, when it comes to understanding how much of your manufacturing process should actually be conducted under CGMP, what we recommend is that sponsors come in and have a CMC focused meeting to discuss their manufacturing process to support pivotal clinical studies and ultimately commercialization. And we recommend this prior to those pivotal clinical studies being run. So usually the end of phase 2 is when that happens. And the FDA assesses the CGMP process based on the guidance ICHQ 11. And there's also a associated questions and answers document as part of that guidance as well. And that helps to determine the appropriate starting materials for a cGMP process. So I wanted to actually just end by kind of reiterating that usually for phase 1 studies, we do not expect that the manufacturing process at that stage is going to be your commercial process. And typically we see a minimal number of steps under cGMP for phase 1 or the first in human study. And as development nears commercialization, we see additional steps are added or needed in order to assure that the manufacturing process meets the ICHQ 11 requirements. And with that, I want to thank you for that question.
Thank you so much for that response, Dr. Patel. We have another question that came in for you as well. Is a COA mandatory for the initial IND clearance?
Thank you for that question. This is a great question as well. For an initial IND submission, we generally need to see some demonstration that the drug substance and drug product can be manufactured in order to support the proposed clinical study. So the actual certificate of analysis for the batches is suggested, but it's not necessary. A summary of the batch data associated with those batches intended for the clinical studies, as well as those that were used in toxicology studies, should be submitted in the IND preferably in a tabular manner, clarifying the intended use of the batches as part of the IND submission. However, the actual primary COAs don't necessarily have to be submitted. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that information as well. Now we'll address a question that came in for Dr. Wearne. Dr. Wearne, can you say more about how you recommend drug developers use the Red Book?
Thank you for that question. So you can access the Red Book online, and there you'll find descriptions of numerous types of toxicity studies, including general toxicology studies, genotoxicity studies, and reproductive studies. And the Red Book describes detailed methods for conducting each of these studies, and so you can use that to help you design your toxicity studies. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response. We have another question for you, Dr. Wearne. For FIH dose selection for oncology and immuno-oncology, can the NOAEL approach also be used? Okay. Sorry, Dr. Wearne, if you're speaking,
I apologize.
No problem.
Sorry. Thank you for that question. No, we generally do not use the no observed adverse effect level from toxicology studies to determine the first in human starting dose for oncology for immune activating products. So for immune activating products, we use a MABEL approach, which is often very centered on in vitro pharmacology data using human cells. And our approach also includes the totality of the non-clinical data in your submission. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that information as well. And now we'll address a question that came in for Dr. Caitlin Tydings. Dr. Tydings, while not mandatory, how often do you request the ICF in an initial IND submission?
Thank you for the question. That is correct. It is not mandatory. It must be stated within the IND submission how informed consent will be obtained, but the document itself is not required. However, I will say that the majority of INDs we do review have informed consent documents included. And depending on the review of the safety as we go through the IND, we may request it if it was not already provided. But I would say the majority already come with them. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response as well. And now we'll go back to Dr. Patel for another question. Dr. Patel, is it still, sorry, how many months of stability data for a drug substance needs to be included into the IND application?
Thank you. This is a great question. So I want to first reference our phase 1 CMC guidance, or what I call our phase 1 CMC guidance. This is essentially the guidance named content and format of INDs for phase 1 studies of drugs, including well-characterized therapeutic biotechnology-derived products. Within that guidance, there is the CMC section that really outlines the requirements for phase 1. And within the section for stability, it does outline that typically for a phase 1 study, what we need is preliminary data based on representative material for both drug substance and drug product. And so there's no strict requirement for the number of months of data that's necessary for a phase 1 study, but the guidance does outline that we need preliminary data on representative material for both of those, for both drug substance and drug product. So I think that as long as there's sufficient data to support the proposed clinical study, to support stability, and then we would need to have stability updates as the clinical study is ongoing. So it's really up to the sponsor to assure that the material going into patients is going to meet the specification at the time that it's dosed. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your response, Dr. Patel. Now we'll have a question for Dr. Jeff Summers. Dr. Summers, how would you interact with FDA if you ran a startup oncology company?
Thanks for the question, Nora. That would be great. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. I would, once again, my part of my outreach efforts is to help everyone realize that they can engage. And I would, you may be doing some fantastic seminal science and be truly on top of your field, but the people at FDA are truly on top of their field with regards to helping you turn your thoughts and your observations into a drug that's reproducibly manufactured and meets all the regulatory requirements that are out there. And there's a good reason that we have those regulatory requirements so that drugs are safe and effective. And I would engage, and that would be at every opportunity that I had. I wouldn't nickel and dime the FDA, but if we have a program, I would avail yourself to those programs, and particularly to all the. There's so much educational guidance out there that you do yourself a disservice not to step up to the plate and truly read that, and then you can ask much more intelligent questions to the FDA. Thanks for the question.
Thank you so much for that response as well. We had another question come in for Dr. Emily Wearne. Could you kindly confirm whether the draft GLP tox report can be submitted at the time of initial IND for any types of INDs, so oncology, non-oncology, bio, or small molecule? Also, the final signed GLP tox report, should that be submitted 120 days after IND clearance or after IND submission?
Thank you for that question. So yes, the draft toxicology report can be submitted for first-in-human INDs for any type of product, whether it's a biologic or a small molecule. And to clarify, the final signed quality-assured GLP toxicology report is expected within 120 days of when FDA receives your IND. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response as well. And we'll go back to Dr. Patel for another question. Do FIH phase 1 studies drugs actually need to be GMP based on the phase 1 CMC guidance?
Thanks. So this question kind of touches a little bit on the first question that I answered related to CGMPs. Again, for phase 1 studies, there's a specific guidance titled CGMPs for phase 1 investigational drugs. And that outlines the requirements So while a phase 1 study does not have to specifically don't have to specifically follow the regulations per CFR 210 and 211, the concepts are still the same. Essentially, you have to have focus on the requirements in 3 areas: having well-defined written procedures, adequately controlled equipment and manufacturing environments, and then considering making sure there's accurate and consistent recording of data and manufacturing. Now, as you move on in clinical studies to phase 2 and phase 3, those phases of development are subject to parts 210 and 211 per the regulations. So really what you want to do in phase 1 is to assure that you are manufacturing and essentially under the concepts of CGMP. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that information you've shared. We now will address a question for Dr. Caitlin Tydings. Dr. Tydings, when is an IND exemption applicable?
Thanks for the questions. So IND exemptions are something that can be quite relevant to academic sponsors as they apply to drugs that are already lawfully marketed in the United States. So the overarching concepts to understand on whether an IND can be exempt are, 1, can the trial results be used to support future marketing of the product or products by the manufacturer? And 2, is there an increased risk to the patients in the trial compared to the patients in the general population receiving the marketed drug? So if the answer is yes or maybe to either one, then an IND will not be exempt. We can help, investigators can determine whether an IND should be exempt, but if there's any question, it's always best just to submit it to FDA, and we can help determine if it will be exempt or not. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response as well. We do have another question for you, Dr. Tydings. Could you please explain why FDA may be moving away from maximum tolerated dose approach?
Sure. So the MTD is a bit of an older concept that we used for dose escalation designs, and it was largely associated with using cytotoxic agents such as chemotherapy. And so now we have a lot of newer drugs who have different mechanisms of action other than cytotoxicity. And so collectively, we're working hard to find ways to better optimize dose selection. And several of us have mentioned Project Optimus, which is undertaking this task. So MTD may not be well served, or I'm sorry, modern anti-cancer drugs may not be well served by the MTD approach. And so we recommend working with FDA to help with that dose optimization process.
Great. Thank you so much for that information. We may have time for one more question. This question came in for Dr. Wearne. If enough publicly available non-clinical information is available for a toxic payload for an ADC, whether non-clinical, ADME, and toxicology studies with the payload for the ADC is needed for the IND filing, what kind of meeting is recommended to get more feedback on this?
Thank you for that question. Yes, so you can rely on product-specific literature to describe the toxicity of a payload for which there's clinical experience, and you can rely on that at the first in human stage, so for your initial IND filing. However, when you reach the marketing stage, you cannot rely on product-specific literature unless you have the right of reference for that data. And to get more feedback on this, you can request a Type B pre-IND meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We might be able to fit in one more question for Dr. Summers as well. Dr. Summers, would you recommend contacting the division office prior to submitting the formal meeting request?
Thanks for the question, Nora. Sorry to perseverate on the guidance documents, but there's a whole guidance document specifically on meeting management. And I haven't read it recently, but I'm assuming in there it tells you exactly how to go about requesting specific meetings that are formal meetings. So they would be pre-IND and above. And the Interact meeting is a reasonably new meeting, and I can't actually tell you what that mechanism is. I assume the pre-IND is similar to the pre-IND meeting. But for the OREG stuff, if you go to the Oncology Center of Excellence's webpage, and in there is a Project Catalyst webpage, and it tells you how to address questions to us with regards to the oncology regulatory expertise and early guidance program, which is much easier and much less formal. So I would, one, read the guidance document, and two, go to the webpage. Thanks.
Right. Thank you again for that response. So it looks like that is all the questions we have time for in this current Q&A panel. Thank you again to our presenters for all the excellent information. Now we'll take a short break and resume at 12:35 Eastern Time.